She thought marrying him would stop the war, but she had no idea she was walking into something far more dangerous. For most of her life, Eleanor Hayes had lived surrounded by violence. She learned to recognize the sound of gunfire before she learned how to drive. She learned that expensive suits often hid weapons. She learned that family dinners could turn into arguments about revenge, loyalty, and death. By the time she was 26, she had attended more funerals and weddings. The Hayes family had spent nearly 20 years at war with the Moretti family. At first, the conflict had started over money, territory, and betrayal. Years earlier, Eleanor's grandfather had blamed the Morettas for destroying one of their biggest shipping businesses near the docks. The Morettas blamed the Hayes family for stealing men, routes, and information. One death turned into another. One betrayal turned into 10 more. Eventually, nobody even remembered where the war truly began. They only remembered the damage it caused. Warehouses had been burned to the ground. Clubs had been attacked. Loyal men had disappeared without explanation. Fathers buried sons. Mothers buried brothers. Children grew up learning how to survive inside a world where nobody stayed safe for long. Eleanor had been 16 when her older brother Jacob was killed outside a restaurant in Brooklyn. He had only been 22. For years afterward, her mother stopped smiling. Her father became harder, colder, and more obsessed with revenge. Their house became filled with security guards, locked gates, and whispers behind closed doors. Nothing ever felt normal again. That was why Eleanor hated the idea of marrying Grayson Moretti. She had heard stories about him for years. Everyone in New York knew his name. Grayson Moretti was the oldest son of the Moretti family, and the man expected to take control of everything after his father stepped down. People described him the same way every time. Cold, dangerous, brilliant. He was the kind of man who rarely smiled and never made the same mistake twice. Men respected him because they feared him. Enemies avoided saying his name too loudly. Businessmen, politicians, and criminals all knew better than to cross him. Eleanor had only seen him once before in person. It happened 2 years earlier at the funeral of one of his cousins. She remembered the way he stood near the front of the church in a black suit with his hands folded in front of him. While everyone else looked emotional, Grayson looked calm, controlled, untouchable. He looked less like a man and more like someone carved from stone. That image stayed in Eleanor's mind the day her father told her she was going to marry him. She had been sitting in the family dining room when her father walked in carrying a folder filled with papers. He looked older than he used to. The war had done that to everyone. Deep lines covered his face. His shoulders stayed tense all the time, even inside his own house. He acted like danger could walk to the front door at any moment. He placed the folder in front of her, without a word. Inside were photographs of Grayson, business meetings, charity events, security reports. There were also copies of contracts between the Hayes and Moretti families. At the very end sat a marriage agreement. Eleanor stared at the papers for several seconds before looking back up. Her father explained that the violence had gone too far. Both families were losing too much money, too many men, too much power. The police had become more aggressive. Federal agents had started asking questions. Rivals were moving into their territory while the Hayes and Moretta stayed busy trying to destroy each other. The marriage would stop the war. At least that was what everyone hoped. Eleanor remembered feeling numb. Not shocked, not angry, just tired, because somewhere deep down, she knew her family would eventually ask something like this from her. Her whole life had been about sacrifice. She sacrificed safety when she stayed loyal to the family. She sacrificed freedom when she accepted bodyguards and security around her every day. Now she was being asked to sacrifice the rest of her life. Across the city, Grayson Moretti received the same news with much less emotion. He sat inside his office near the Moretti estate while his father explained the agreement. Grayson did not argue. He did not ask questions. He simply looked through the papers in silence. Marriage did not matter to him. Love mattered even less. For Grayson, this was strategy. A marriage would calm both families. It would stop the losses. It would protect the Moretti empire from becoming weaker. If marrying Eleanor Hayes achieved that goal, then he would do it. That was how he viewed most things in life, as problems to solve. Still, even Grayson could not ignore one detail. Eleanor Hayes looked nothing like the women usually connected to powerful families. She looked softer, more real, in every photograph. There was sadness in her face that could not be hidden by makeup or expensive clothes. Grayson noticed it immediately. He just did not understand why. The weeks before the wedding felt unbearable for Eleanor. Meetings happened almost every day. Lawyers reviewed agreements. Family members argued about money, property, and security. Designers arrived at the Hayes estate with dresses, flowers, jewelry, and invitations. Everything looked beautiful on the outside, but beneath the expensive details, fear followed everyone. The wedding venue had to be changed twice because of security threats. Guards surrounded both families day and night. Snipers were placed on rooftops near the church. No one trusted the peace. Not completely. Eleanor hated every second of it. She hated the wedding dress hanging in her closet. She hated the newspaper articles already calling it the wedding of the year. Most of all, she hated how everyone kept acting like her feelings did not matter. Her mother kept reminding her that this marriage would save lives. Her father kept telling her she was doing the right thing. Even her cousins treated her like some kind of hero preparing to make a noble sacrifice. But Eleanor did not feel brave. She felt trapped. 1 week before the wedding, she finally met Grayson properly for the first time. Their families arranged a private dinner at one of the Moretti restaurants downtown. The restaurant was closed to the public. Armed guards stood near every entrance. Even inside, the room felt tense. Eleanor arrived wearing a dark green dress and carrying every fear she had about him. Grayson stood near the windows when she walked in. He looked exactly like she expected. Tall, broad shoulders, black suit, sharp jawline, dark eyes that revealed almost nothing. He greeted her politely, but there was no warmth in him, no kindness, no sign that he wanted this any more than she did. For most of the dinner, they barely spoke. The silence between them felt heavy. When Grayson finally looked at her directly, Eleanor realized something unsettling. He was not cruel. That would have been easier. Cruel men were simple to hate. Instead, Grayson looked empty, like someone who had spent years building walls around himself until there was almost nothing left underneath. That scared Eleanor more than anger would have, because she could not imagine spending the rest of her life beside someone who looked incapable of feeling anything at all. That night, she sat alone in her bedroom long after everyone else went to sleep. The wedding dress stood near the corner of the room. Her phone kept buzzing with messages from family members, friends, and reporters trying to get information. Eleanor ignored all of them. She walked toward the window and looked out at the security guards standing outside her house. For one horrible second, she imagined running away. She imagined getting into a car and driving until New York disappeared behind her. She imagined a life without guards, guns, family meetings, and funeral black dresses. But she knew she would never do it, because too many people were depending on her. If she ran, the war would begin again. More people would die. Maybe her father. Maybe one of her younger cousins. Maybe innocent people caught in the middle. That was the moment Eleanor realized something that made her chest tighten with fear. She was not getting married because she wanted to. She was getting married because everyone else had decided her life was worth less than peace. The wedding day arrived beneath gray skies. The church sat outside the city on private property surrounded by trees, gates, and armed guards. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Men in black suits stood near every door. Both families arrived separately. Nobody smiled. Nobody relaxed. The hatred between the Hayes and Moretti families still existed beneath the expensive clothes and fake politeness. Eleanor stood in one of the back rooms wearing a long white dress covered with lace. The dress was beautiful. She hated it. Her mother adjusted the veil while tears filled her eyes. Her father stood near the doorway looking proud, tired, and emotional all at once. For a moment, Eleanor almost wanted to beg him to stop this. But when she looked at his face, she knew it would change nothing. Outside the room, music started playing. The ceremony was beginning. Across the church, Grayson stood near the altar in a black suit with his hands folded in front of him. He looked calm, cold, like this was just another business meeting. But deep down, even he felt the pressure of the moment, because as much as he pretended otherwise, he understood what this marriage really meant. It was not just about peace. It was about trust. And trust was something neither family had ever truly given anyone. When Eleanor finally walked into the church, every person in the room turned to look at her. The church looked beautiful. White flowers covered the pews. Large candles lined the walls. Soft light poured through the stained glass windows. But none of it felt romantic. It felt like a performance. A fragile agreement dressed up as a wedding. As Eleanor walked toward Grayson, her hand shook beneath the flowers she carried. When she reached the altar, Grayson looked down at her. For 1 second, something shifted in his face. Not enough to soften him completely, just enough to make him seem human. The ceremony continued in silence. Their families watched carefully. The priest spoke about unity, loyalty, and forgiveness. Nobody in the room truly believed those things. Then came the vows. Eleanor forced herself to speak. Grayson did the same. A few moments later, the ceremony ended. They were husband and wife. The church filled with quiet applause. Photographers moved closer. Family members smiled for the cameras. But beneath the expensive decorations and public celebration, something still felt wrong. Because while everyone else celebrated peace, Eleanor could not stop feeling like she had just stepped into the beginning of something much darker. Only a few hours after the wedding ended, Eleanor disappeared from the mansion without leaving a trace. A woman surrounded by guards, cameras, and armed men vanished in less than 15 minutes. At first, nobody realized Eleanor Hayes Moretti was missing. The wedding reception continued inside the Moretti estate with music, expensive food, and forced smiles. Politicians, businessmen, judges, and powerful families moved through the ballroom pretending that years of hatred had suddenly disappeared because of one marriage. Eleanor had smiled when people looked at her. She had stood beside Grayson while photographers captured pictures of them together. She had thanked guests, shaken hands, and listened to strangers tell her how beautiful she looked. But beneath the expensive white dress and diamond jewelry, she felt exhausted. The reception hall felt too loud, too crowded, too fake. Every person who congratulated her looked like someone who would not hesitate to betray her if the war started again. After nearly 2 hours of smiling for people she did not trust, Eleanor quietly stepped away from the ballroom. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. Most people assumed she needed a few minutes alone. Even Grayson barely noticed at first. He stood near one side of the ballroom, speaking with his father, several lawyers, and 2 city officials who had quietly supported the marriage agreement. He looked exactly the same as always. Cold, controlled, untouchable. But even Grayson felt the pressure building beneath the surface. The peace between the Moretti and Hayes families was fragile. One mistake could destroy everything. That was why he kept scanning the room every few seconds, watching faces, watching body language, watching for signs that someone might be planning something. At first, he simply assumed Eleanor had gone upstairs to change out her wedding dress. Then 15 minutes passed. A server approached him quietly and explained that no one had seen her since she left the ballroom. Grayson looked toward the staircase immediately. His expression did not change, but something dark moved behind his eyes. He walked out of the ballroom without saying a word. Upstairs, the mansion felt strangely quiet compared to the noise below. Long hallways stretched across the second floor. Security guards stood near every entrance. Cameras covered every corner. Grayson moved quickly toward the bridal suite prepared for Eleanor earlier that day. The room was empty. The bathroom was empty. The balcony doors were locked from the inside. For 1 second, Grayson simply stood there. Then he turned toward the guard outside the room. The man immediately looked nervous. No one liked being the center of Grayson Moretti's attention when something went wrong. The guard explained that Eleanor had gone upstairs alone. She had not been crying. She had not looked upset. She had simply walked toward her room. Nobody saw her leave. Nobody saw anyone follow her. That answer made no sense. The Moretti estate was one of the most secure private properties in New York. Tall gates surrounded the mansion. Armed guards stood at every entrance. Security cameras watched every hallway, staircase, balcony, and driveway. No one entered or left without permission, which meant Eleanor could not have disappeared on her own, not unless someone helped her. Within minutes, panic spread through the state. The music inside the ballroom stopped. Guests began whispering to each other. Members of both families moved to the mansion, searching every room, hallway, garden, and guest area. Guards checked the gates. Drivers checked the garages. Security teams searched the property surrounding the mansion. Nothing. No sign of Eleanor anywhere. Grayson walked through the house like a man trying to hold himself together by force. His face stayed calm. But people around him noticed a change immediately. He looked colder than before, more dangerous. One of the Hayes family members accused the Morettas of hiding Eleanor somewhere inside the mansion. One of Grayson's uncles accused Eleanor of running away because she never wanted the marriage. The argument nearly turned violent. For one terrifying moment, it looked like the war between the families might begin again right there inside the estate. Only Grayson's father managed to stop it. Barely. The rumors started almost immediately. Some people believed Eleanor ran away because she could not handle the marriage. Others believed she had been kidnapped by one of the many enemies who wanted the peace agreement destroyed. A few people whispered something worse. That Eleanor never planned to become Grayson's wife at all. That she had used the wedding to embarrass the Moretti family before disappearing. Those rumors spread quickly through the guests. By midnight, they had already started reaching reporters, police officers, and rival families across the city. Grayson ignored all of it, because deep down he knew one thing for certain. Eleanor did not look like someone planning to run away. He remembered the expression on her face during the ceremony, the fear, the exhaustion, the sadness, but not deception, not betrayal. Something about this felt wrong, planned, carefully controlled. He went back upstairs himself. This time, he searched Eleanor's room alone. The bridal suite still looked untouched. Her wedding dress hung near the bed where she had changed into a simpler white evening dress earlier in the night. Her jewelry sat on the dresser. One of her suitcases remained unopened near the closet. If Eleanor had planned to leave, she would have taken something. Money, clothes, her phone. But everything was still there. Even her purse remained near the bed. Grayson noticed something strange near the balcony doors. One of the curtains had been pulled slightly out of place. It looked small, almost meaningless. But when he moved closer, he saw faint marks near the bottom of the glass doors. Scratches, like someone had forced them open for a moment before locking them again. He stepped onto the balcony. Below him, the estate garden stretched across the property. Security lights covered every path. Guards stood near the fountain and main entrance. There was no easy way out, unless someone had been waiting below. Grayson looked down toward the garden wall and noticed another detail. A section of flowers beneath the balcony had been crushed, as if someone had landed there. His jaw tightened immediately, because that changed everything. Someone had taken Eleanor, and they had done it right in the middle of the most heavily guarded night of the year. Behind him, one of his men entered the room carrying security footage from the cameras. Grayson watched every recording himself. He saw Eleanor leave the ballroom. He saw her walk upstairs. He saw her enter the bridal suite. After that, the hallway cameras showed nothing. No one entered. No one left. It was impossible. The footage made no sense. Unless someone inside the estate had disabled part of the security system. That possibility felt even worse, because it meant Eleanor's disappearance came from inside. Someone inside the Moretti family, or the Hayes family, or both. By 2 a.m, the mansion no longer felt like a wedding venue. It felt like the beginning of another war. Members of both families gathered in separate rooms. Voices became louder. Old accusations returned. One of Eleanor's uncles openly blamed Grayson for failing to protect her. One of Grayson's cousins claimed Eleanor planned the entire thing. Every word pushed the peace agreement closer to collapse. Still, Grayson said very little. He stayed focused on the search. He walked through the estate grounds himself. He checked the gates. He questioned every guard. He reviewed every camera angle twice. Nothing. No sign of Eleanor. No witnesses. No car leaving the property. No evidence beyond the crushed flowers beneath the balcony. For the first time in years, Grayson felt something he hated. Fear. Not fear for himself. Fear for her. That feeling bothered him more than he wanted to admit, because he barely knew Eleanor. They had only spent a few weeks around each other. The marriage had not been about love. It had been about peace. But now that she was gone, something inside him felt wrong. Empty, as if the mansion itself had become colder without her inside it. Near dawn, Grayson returned to the bridal suite one last time. The room felt even quieter than before. He looked around slowly. The bed remained untouched. The light stayed on. One of Eleanor's earrings still sat near the mirror. That was when he noticed something hidden beneath the vanity table. A folded piece of paper. It had been pushed far enough underneath that no one saw it earlier. Grayson bent down and picked it up slowly. The paper looked old, folded several times. His name was written across the front in Eleanor's handwriting. For 1 second, he simply stared at it. Then he unfolded the paper. Inside was a short letter. The handwriting looked rushed, uneven, like Eleanor had written it in fear. She wrote that if anything happened to her, he needed to know one thing. She never planned to run away. She never wanted to humiliate him or destroy the peace between the families. She wrote that someone had been threatening her long before the wedding. Someone who knew secrets about her family. Someone who promised that marrying Grayson would only make things worse. At the very bottom of the letter, one final sentence had been written more heavily than the rest. There is something about my family that nobody told you. Grayson stared down at the words in silence, because in that moment, he realized Eleanor had not disappeared because she wanted freedom. She disappeared because someone had taken her, and whatever secret she had been hiding was dangerous enough to destroy, far more than a marriage. Before she became Grayson's wife, Eleanor was already running from a secret powerful enough to destroy both families. Grayson read Eleanor's letter 3 times before the words finally started to settle in his mind. She never planned to run away. Someone had been threatening her. There is something about my family that nobody told you. By sunrise, the Moretti estate had turned silent. Most of the wedding guests were gone. Members of both families stayed inside separate parts of the mansion, watching each other with suspicion. The marriage that was supposed to end the war had lasted less than a day. Now Grayson stood alone inside his office, staring at Eleanor's letter while the city outside slowly woke up. For the first time in years, he did not feel in control. He had spent his whole life learning how to read people. He knew when someone lied. He knew when someone was planning betrayal. But Eleanor had managed to hide an entire part of her life from him. That bothered him more than her disappearance, because now he realized something dangerous. He never really knew the woman he married. By mid-morning, Grayson ordered his men to bring everything they could find about Eleanor's past. Not the public version everyone already knew. The real version. School records, old addresses, financial reports, phone activity, friends, relationships, every detail. He sat in his office for hours while papers, photographs, and reports slowly covered the desk. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Eleanor had gone to private schools. She studied art history in college. She worked for a charity connected to children's hospitals. She spent most of her life moving between guarded houses, private schools, and family events. On the surface, she looked exactly like the daughter of a powerful family. But then the details started changing. There were large cash withdrawals from one of Eleanor's private bank accounts over the last 6 months. Thousands of dollars taken out in small amounts, enough to avoid attention. There were calls made from a second phone no one knew she had. There were visits to neighborhoods far away from the Hayes family businesses. And there was one name that appeared over and over again. Damian Cross. Grayson stared at the name for several seconds. He had heard it before. Damian Cross was not connected to either family directly, but everyone in the city knew what he was. A fixer, a blackmailer, a man who sold information to the highest bidder. He stayed away from wars because secrets made him more money than bullets ever could. If Eleanor had been meeting with Damian Cross, then she had been hiding something serious. Grayson ordered one of his men to bring him everything they had on Damian. Within an hour, more files arrived. Photographs, business records, police reports. Damian was 42 years old with a long history of fraud, extortion, and disappearing women. He had been arrested twice, but every witness against him somehow vanished before trial. He owned several clubs, a private security company, and 2 office buildings downtown. Most importantly, he had recently been seen meeting with members of both the Hayes and Moretti families. That was when Grayson started understanding how dangerous this really was. Damien was not just blackmailing Eleanor. He was playing both families against each other. Grayson found another photograph buried near the bottom of the file. The picture showed Eleanor walking out of a coffee shop 3 months earlier. Damien stood beside her. Eleanor looked pale, scared. She looked nothing like someone meeting a friend. She looked like someone trapped. That image stayed in Grayson's mind, because suddenly he realized Eleanor had been carrying fear long before she walked down the aisle. Months before the wedding, Eleanor's life had already started falling apart. It began with a package left outside her apartment. No return address. No note. Inside sat a photograph of her mother standing beside a man Eleanor had never seen before. The photograph looked old, maybe 25 years old. On the back were only 2 words. Ask her. At first, Eleanor thought it was some kind of mistake. But a week later, another package arrived. This time, it contained copies of old bank records connected to her mother's name. Then came a third envelope. Inside sat one sentence typed across a piece of paper. Your mother lied about who you are. That sentence changed everything. Eleanor spent weeks trying to ignore it. But eventually, curiosity became stronger than fear. She confronted her mother privately. At first, her mother denied everything. But Eleanor could see the fear in her face. Real fear, the kind that only appeared when people were hiding something terrible. Finally, her mother admitted the truth. Years earlier, before marrying Eleanor's father, she had been involved with another man, a man connected to organized crime in Chicago, a man named Victor Callahan. He was dangerous, powerful, and violent. When Eleanor's mother became pregnant, she ran away from him and came back to New York. Soon after, she married Eleanor's father. The secret stayed buried for more than 26 years, until someone dug it up. Eleanor spent days trying to process the truth, because suddenly she no longer knew who she was. The man who raised her might not have been her biological father. Her entire life might have been built on a lie. That was when Damien Cross contacted her directly. He called from a blocked number. He never threatened her openly. He did not need to. He simply told her that if she refused to cooperate, the truth about her mother would become public. He knew about the wedding arrangement before anyone announced it. He knew about her family. He knew things no outsider should know. That terrified Eleanor, because it meant someone close to her was feeding him information. For months, Damien kept pressuring her. He wanted documents connected to the Hayes family businesses. Old files, private accounts, hidden properties. At first, Eleanor refused. But Damien knew exactly where to hurt her. He threatened her mother. He threatened to expose the truth about Victor Callahan. He threatened to destroy what remained of her family. So Eleanor started collecting things. Copies of records, family papers, private information from offices inside the Hayes estate. Not because she wanted to betray anyone, because she thought giving Damien what he wanted might protect her mother. That was the part nobody understood. Eleanor was not selfish. She was terrified. Every day, she woke up feeling like she was carrying a bomb inside her chest. She stopped sleeping. She stopped trusting people. Even before the wedding, she felt like someone was always watching her. She kept extra locks on her apartment doors. She changed her routes through the city. She checked over her shoulder every time she entered a room. That was why she looked so exhausted during the wedding. Not because she feared Grayson. Because she feared what might happen once Damien realized she was becoming a Moretti. Back inside the Moretti estate, Grayson slowly put the pieces together. He found proof that Eleanor had rented a storage unit under a fake name 6 months earlier. Inside, his men discovered copies of old Hayes family records, photographs, financial files, and newspaper clippings connected to Victor Callahan. There was also a locked metal box. Inside sat letters from Damien. Threats, deadlines, warnings. One letter stood out more than the others. It told Eleanor that if she married Grayson Moretti without cooperating, people would die. At the bottom, Damien wrote one sentence that made Grayson's blood run cold. You are not the only child your mother lied about. Grayson stared at the words in silence, because suddenly, Eleanor's secret looked even bigger than he imagined. There was something else hidden inside the Hayes family, something connected to her mother, something dangerous enough to scare Eleanor into silence. For the first time since reading her letter, Grayson stopped feeling angry. Now he understood why Eleanor looked so afraid. She had been trying to survive, trying to protect her mother, trying to protect whatever secret Damien held over her family. And she had done all of it alone. That realization bothered him more than anything else. Because if Eleanor had trusted him, maybe none of this would have happened. But deep down, he understood why she did not. He had spent weeks treating the marriage like business, like she was only a solution to a problem. He never gave her a reason to trust him. By late afternoon, Grayson finally found the first real break in the case. One of his men brought him security reports from the night of the wedding. Most of the guards followed the same routes through the estate. But one section of the cameras had been disabled for exactly 7 minutes near the garden wall beneath Eleanor's balcony. 7 minutes. Just enough time for someone to climb down, cross the property, and disappear through the east service gate. Grayson looked at the list of guards assigned to that section of the estate. Most of the names meant nothing to him, until he reached the final one. Luca Moretti, his cousin, the same cousin who spent the entire wedding complaining about the peace agreement, the same cousin who believed the Hayes family could never be trusted. And according to the reports, Luca disappeared from his post during the exact moment Eleanor vanished. Grayson stared down at the file in silence, because now he knew one thing for certain. Eleanor did not disappear alone. Someone inside his own family helped her vanish. The person who betrayed Grayson had been sitting at his family table for years. For several seconds, Grayson could not move. He stared down at Luca Moretti's name on the security report while anger slowly built inside him. Luca was not some distant cousin he barely knew. He had grown up with him. They spent summers together as boys. They learned how to shoot together. They sat beside each other at family dinners for years. And now Grayson realized that someone he trusted had been standing behind Eleanor's disappearance from the beginning. Outside the office windows, the Moretti estate looked calm. But inside the house, everything felt different now. Every hallway looked suspicious. Every face looked dishonest. Because betrayal from an enemy was expected. Betrayal from family felt worse. Grayson ordered Dominic to bring Luca to the estate immediately. But by the time Dominic returned, the news was worse than expected. Luca was gone. His penthouse apartment sat empty. His phones were disconnected. 2 of the men usually assigned him had disappeared too. That told Grayson everything he needed to know. Luca was running, and innocent people did not run. The rest of the family gathered that evening inside the formal dining room. For the first time since the wedding, the peace between them was completely gone. Grayson sat at one end of the table while his uncles, cousins, and older relatives watched him carefully. No one touched the food. No one looked comfortable, because everyone already knew what had happened. They just did not know how much Grayson knew. Luca's father, Vincent Moretti, looked angrier than nervous. He sat near the center of the table with one hand wrapped around a glass of whiskey. "You are making accusations without proof," Vincent said coldly. Grayson looked at him. "Your son disappeared the same night my wife vanished." Vincent did not move. That does not mean he helped her. He abandoned his post. He had a right to leave if he wanted. Grayson leaned back slightly. He also transferred money into 3 offshore accounts a day before the wedding. That finally made Vincent go quiet. Several people around the table exchanged nervous looks because they had not known that part. Grayson had spent the last several hours digging through Luca's financial records. The results told a dangerous story. Luca received large payments over the last year from shell companies connected to Chicago, New Jersey, and overseas accounts. The money had no clear source. But Grayson knew exactly what it meant. Someone had been paying Luca. Someone powerful. One of Grayson's uncles looked down at the table. "This family has too many enemies," he said quietly. Luca could have been threatened. Grayson looked at him. Threatened people asked for help. The room became quiet again, because deep down, everyone knew the truth. Luca had not been forced. He had chosen this. That was the part Grayson hated most. Because Luca had always been jealous of him. Even as children, it was obvious. Grayson was the oldest son, the future head of the family, the one their grandfather trusted. Luca spent years living in his shadow. No matter what he did, he was always second. Second in power, second in respect, second in importance. As they got older, the jealousy only became worse. Grayson took over the family businesses. Grayson earned loyalty from the captains. Grayson became the face of the Moretti empire. Meanwhile, Luca stayed stuck handling smaller operations nobody respected. That resentment had been building for years. Now Grayson realized just how dangerous it had become. Later that night, Dominic brought him another file. This one contained private phone records connected to Luca. Most of the calls led nowhere. Burner phones, fake names, blocked numbers. But one number appeared too often to ignore. The call started nearly 8 months earlier, long before Eleanor entered Grayson's life, long before the wedding. That meant one terrifying thing. Her disappearance had not been some sudden decision. It had been planned from the beginning. Grayson looked at the final pages of the report. The unknown number had also been linked to Damien Cross. Now everything connected. Damien had been blackmailing Eleanor. Luca had been helping from inside the Moretti family. Someone wanted Eleanor scared, isolated, and vulnerable long before the marriage happened. And someone wanted the peace between the families to fail. The more Grayson investigated, the worse things became. By the next morning, he discovered that several Moretti businesses had quietly been losing money for months. Large amounts disappeared from private accounts. Shipments went missing. Security routes changed without approval. Somebody had been weakening the family from the inside, and Luca was not smart enough to do all of that alone. There had to be someone else. Someone older. Someone closer to the center of the family. That realization made Grayson start questioning everyone, even Dominic, even the men who had protected him for years. He stopped trusting people easily. He stopped sleeping. He moved between safe houses instead of staying at this state. Every car behind him looked suspicious. Every phone call sounded dangerous. For the first time in his life, Grayson felt alone, because when trust disappears, power starts disappearing with it. Violence spread through the city again within days. The Hayes family blamed the Morettas for Eleanor's disappearance. The Morettas blamed the Hayes family for creating the secret that destroyed the marriage. 2 businesses connected to the Hayes family burned near Brooklyn. A Moretti warehouse was attacked near the docks. One of Grayson's captains disappeared while driving home. Another turned up dead outside a club in Queens. The war everyone tried to stop had started again. And somehow, it looked worse than before. People inside both families began choosing sides. Some wanted peace. Others wanted revenge. Several of Grayson's older relatives quietly admitted they never wanted the marriage in the first place. They believed peace made the family weak. One of his uncles finally said it openly during a meeting. War keeps people loyal, he said. Fear keeps them obedient. Grayson looked at him with disgust. You sound exactly like my father. The room went quiet, because nobody ever spoke about Grayson's father that way. But Grayson no longer cared. He was tired of pretending his family was better than the men they fought. The truth was uglier than that. The Moretti family did not just survive on loyalty. They survived on fear, greed, and secrets. And maybe they always had. 3 days after Eleanor disappeared, Grayson finally found Luca. One of his men spotted him at a private house near the water outside Atlantic City. Grayson drove there himself. He brought Dominic and 4 armed men. The house looked expensive from the outside. White stone walls, large windows, private security near the gates. But Grayson could tell immediately that Luca was scared. Men who felt safe did not hide that far from the city. They found him inside the kitchen trying to pack a suitcase. Luca looked shocked the second he saw Grayson. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Then Luca reached toward the counter. Grayson pulled his gun first. Do not. Luca froze. His face looked pale. You should listen to me, he said quickly. Grayson stepped farther into the room. You helped take her. Luca shook his head immediately. It is not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Luca looked down. For the first time in years, he looked weak. Not dangerous. Not arrogant. Just weak. I did not want her hurt, he said quietly. Grayson almost laughed. Then why did you help them? Luca looked up at him. Because the marriage was a mistake. The answer made something dark move through Grayson's face. Luca stepped back. You were giving away everything our family built, he said. Peace with the Hayes family would have destroyed us. Grayson stared at him. You destroyed us. Luca shook his head quickly. You do not understand. People inside the family agreed with me. That sentence changed everything. Because suddenly, Luca did not sound like a man working alone. He sounded like someone following orders. Who? Grayson asked quietly. Luca looked away. Grayson stepped closer. Who? Luca swallowed hard. Your Uncle Salvatore. For 1 second, the room became silent. Salvatore Moretti was his father's younger brother, the man who taught him how to fight, the man who sat beside him at family meetings, the man who always supported him after his father died. Grayson stared at Luca in disbelief, because if Salvatore was involved, then the betrayal ran deeper than he imagined. Luca lowered his voice. He never wanted the marriage. He said peace would make the family look weak. Grayson's hand tightened around the gun. Why help Damien Cross? Luca looked nervous again. Because Damien promised us something. What? Luca hesitated too long. Grayson grabbed him by the collar. What? Luca's voice shook. He said Eleanor was connected to something bigger. Grayson stared at him. What does that mean? Luca looked terrified now. He said someone from her past wanted her back. The room went quiet again. Grayson slowly let go of him. Who? Luca shook his head. I did not know his real name. Grayson's expression darkened. Then tell me what you do know. Luca swallowed hard. They called him Callahan. That name hit Grayson harder than expected, because he remembered it immediately. Victor Callahan. The dangerous man from Eleanor's mother's past. The man who might have been Eleanor's biological father. The man everyone believed disappeared years ago. Grayson looked at Luca with cold disbelief. You are telling me Eleanor's alive? Luca nodded slowly. Grayson's heartbeat quickened. Where is she? Luca looked away. I did not know exactly. Grayson grabbed him again. Where? Luca's face went pale. The last time I heard, they moved her to a private property outside Chicago. Grayson stared at him, because after days of fear, anger, and betrayal, one truth finally became clear. Eleanor was still alive, and someone from her past was holding her. The marriage started as a deal between enemies, but somewhere along the way, Grayson fell in love with his wife. For most of his life, Grayson Moretti believed love was a weakness. He grew up watching men in his family lose everything because they cared too much about the wrong person. His father buried loyalty beneath power. His uncles treated marriage like a business deal. Women came and went through the Moretti world, but none of them stayed long enough to matter. That was why Grayson accepted the marriage to Eleanor Hayes so easily in the beginning. He never saw her as a wife. He saw her as a solution, a way to stop the war, a way to keep more men from dying, a way to protect what was left of both families. At first, Eleanor looked at him the same way. She did not trust him. She did not believe a Moretti could ever be anything except dangerous. The first time they met privately before the wedding, Eleanor stood across from him inside one of the neutral safe houses arranged by both families. She wore a dark green coat and kept her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her eyes never left his face. She looked nervous. But more than that, she looked angry. Grayson remembered noticing that first. Not her beauty, not the expensive dress she wore later at the engagement dinner. It was the anger, because unlike everyone else around him, Eleanor did not try to hide what she felt. She looked at him like she hated everything his name represented. And somehow, Grayson respected that. She asked him only one question during that first meeting. She wanted to know if he believed the marriage would really stop the violence. Grayson told her yes. But even then, he remembered noticing something strange in her expression. She wanted to believe him. That was the dangerous part. Because deep down, Eleanor still believed people could become better than the families they came from. Grayson had stopped believing that years ago. In the weeks before the wedding, they saw each other more often. Family dinners, private meetings, charity events, security discussions. At first, every conversation felt cold and formal. Neither of them wanted to be there. Neither of them trusted the other. But slowly, small things started changing. Grayson noticed she hated crowded rooms. She always stood near exits. She always kept one hand wrapped around a glass, even when she was not drinking. He noticed she barely touched the expensive jewelry her family gave her. He noticed she looked uncomfortable when people stared at her too long. And he noticed something else too. Eleanor was lonely, not weak, not fragile, just lonely in the way people became after spending too many years carrying secrets by themselves. That was the first thing that made Grayson feel protective. One night, a few weeks before the wedding, both families attended a formal dinner inside a private club near Manhattan. The dinner was supposed to show unity between the families. Instead, it turned into another reminder of how much hatred still existed between them. One of Grayson's older cousins made a cruel joke about Eleanor's mother. Half the room laughed. Eleanor did not. She stayed completely still. But Grayson noticed the way her face changed, the way she looked down at her hands, the way she quietly excused herself from the room a few minutes later. Nobody else followed her. Nobody except Grayson. He found her standing alone near the back terrace, overlooking the river. Cold wind moved through her hair. She looked calmer outside, farther away from the noise. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Grayson quietly placed his jacket over her shoulders. Eleanor looked surprised. She asked him why he came after her. Grayson told her he was tired of watching people hurt her just because they could. That was the first honest thing he ever gave her. And Eleanor never forgot it. After that night, something between them changed. Not all at once, but enough. They started speaking more openly during private meetings. Eleanor learned that Grayson hated cigars because they reminded him of his father. She learned he could not sleep when it rained because storms reminded him of the night his older brother died. She learned he preferred silence over crowds. She learned he read history books when he could not calm his mind. And Grayson learned things about her, too. He learned she secretly donated money to shelters without telling her family. He learned she still visited her mother's grave alone every year. He learned she hated being touched unexpectedly because it reminded her of Damien Cross. He learned she was stronger than anyone gave her credit for. One afternoon, only days before the wedding, Eleanor got trapped inside a courthouse parking garage when two men connected to Damien tried to corner her. Grayson happened to arrive before anything could happen. He never forgot the look on her face when she saw him walking toward her. Relief. Real relief. That was when he realized she trusted him more than she wanted to admit. And that was when he realized he cared more than he should. The wedding itself felt strange from the beginning. Too beautiful. Too expensive. Too perfect. White flowers covered the church. Politicians, businessmen, judges, and criminals sat side by side pretending they wanted peace. Eleanor looked beautiful walking down the aisle. But Grayson remembered something more important. She looked scared. Not of him. Of everything else. Of what the marriage meant. Of what might happen if it failed. When she reached him at the altar, her hands were shaking. Nobody else noticed. But Grayson did. So while everyone watched him exchange vows, Grayson quietly promised himself something. No matter what happened between the families, he would protect her. At the time, he thought it was duty. Now he understood it was already love. That was why Eleanor's disappearance destroyed him so completely. It was not just because she was his wife. It was because she had become the one person in his life who made him feel like he could still be something better than his family expected him to be. Without her, everything inside him became colder. He stopped caring about appearances. He stopped caring about money. He stopped caring about the rules that kept peace inside the city. For days after she vanished, Grayson barely slept. He sat inside dark offices staring at security footage. He replayed old recordings from the wedding. He read her letter over and over. He looked through photographs from the weeks before the marriage. And with every memory, the pain became worse. Because suddenly he saw all the moments he missed. The way she looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention. The way she smiled whenever he defended her. The way she relaxed when he stood close to her. the way she trusted him even when she had no reason to. Grayson spent years believing love made men weak. Now he understood something worse. Love did not make men weak. It made them dangerous. Because once someone mattered that much, losing them felt impossible to survive. Dominic saw the change in him, too. One night, while Grayson sat alone inside his office, Dominic finally asked a question nobody else wanted to ask. He wanted to know if Grayson was willing to destroy what remained of the peace just to get Eleanor back. Grayson looked at him for a long moment. Then he gave the only answer he could. Peace no longer mattered without her. That answer terrified Dominic, because he knew Grayson meant it. By the time Luca admitted Eleanor was alive, Grayson had already become someone else. Harder, more reckless, less patient. The version of him that wanted peace disappeared the night Eleanor vanished. The only thing left now was the man willing to burn cities for her. Still, despite everything, Eleanor remained the only thing that softened him, even in her absence, especially in her absence. Grayson kept one of her books beside his bed. He kept the wedding ring she never had time to wear. He kept the flowers she dropped near the church steps before the ceremony. Small things, meaningless things to anyone else. But to Grayson, they were proof she was real, proof that she existed outside the violence, proof that there was still something worth saving. 3 nights after Luca confessed, Dominic walked into Grayson's office with another file. This one came from one of their contacts near Chicago. Grayson stood immediately. Inside the file were photographs of a private estate outside the city. Tall gates, heavy security, armed men near the entrance. And in one blurry image taken near an upstairs window, Grayson saw her. Eleanor, alive. She looked thinner, tired, but alive. For 1 second, Grayson forgot how to breathe. He touched the photograph like he could somehow reach through it. Dominic watched him carefully. He already knew what Grayson was going to do, because there was no version of the story where Grayson walked away. The estate belonged to Victor Callahan, a man with enough money, soldiers, and connections to start another war all by himself. Taking Eleanor back would not be simple. It would not be quiet, and it would not end without blood. Grayson looked down at the photograph one last time. Then he slowly reached for the gun on his desk, because he finally knew where Eleanor was. And reaching her meant starting another war. He married her to stop a war, but he was willing to start another one just to bring her home. The moment Grayson saw Eleanor's photograph inside the Chicago estate, the last piece of restraint inside him disappeared. For weeks, he had been chasing shadows, rumors, half-truths, names that led nowhere. Now, he finally had something real. Eleanor was alive, and someone powerful was keeping her from him. The estate outside Chicago belonged to Victor Callahan, a man even older mob families avoided speaking about too loudly. He had built power quietly over the years through judges, unions, private security companies, and politicians. Unlike the Morettus and Hayes family, Callahan never wanted public attention. He stayed hidden. That made him more dangerous. Men like Victor Callahan did not survive that long by making mistakes. Grayson gathered his most loyal men inside an old warehouse near the river the next morning. Maps covered the walls. Weapons covered the tables. The room smelled like oil, rain, and cigarette smoke. Dominic stood near the center of the room with several captains beside him. Nobody spoke at first, because everyone already knew what Grayson wanted. This was no longer about peace. This was war. Grayson looked around the room. For the first time in his life, he no longer cared about appearances. His tie was gone. His sleeves were rolled up. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. "Callahan is Eleanor," he said quietly. The room stayed silent. "We are bringing her home." One of the older captains stepped forward. "Chicago belongs to him," he said carefully. "If we move against him, every alliance we have left disappears." Grayson looked at him, then let them disappear. Nobody argued after that, because they could hear something dangerous in his voice. This was not the same Grayson who wanted peace through marriage. This was the version of him his enemies feared, the version willing to burn cities for one person. Over the next 2 days, the Moretti family moved like an army preparing for battle. Weapons arrived from private contacts near New Jersey. Armored SUVs lined up outside warehouses. Men loyal to Grayson traveled in from Miami, Philadelphia, and Las Vegas. Some came because they respected him. Others came because they hated Victor Callahan more. The Hayes family surprised everyone by offering support too. At first, Grayson expected Eleanor's family to blame him for everything. Instead, her older brother, Bennett Hayes, arrived at the warehouse with 6 armed men and an offer. He wanted to help. Bennett looked exhausted, angrier than Grayson had ever seen him, because despite everything between their families, Eleanor was still his sister, and losing her mattered more than old hatred. For a moment, neither man trusted the other, but war had a way of changing priorities. Bennett spread photographs of Chicago estate across the table. There are at least 30 guards, he said quietly. Private security outside. Cameras on every entrance. Motion sensors near the back fence. Dominic frowned. That is not a house. That is a fortress. Bennett nodded once. Callahan built it to survive a siege. Grayson stared down at the photographs, because he already understood something important. Victor Callahan was not keeping Eleanor alive because he wanted ransom money. Men like him already had enough money. He wanted something else. Power, influence, acclaim. The rumors surrounding Eleanor's mother suddenly mattered more than ever. If Eleanor truly carried Callahan blood, then she was not just some kidnapped bride. She was leverage, a symbol, a way for Callahan to build something bigger that made her even more dangerous to him alive than dead. Meanwhile, inside the Chicago estate, Eleanor was fighting her own war. The house looked beautiful from the outside. Tall windows, marble floors, expensive furniture, fresh flowers in every room. But none of it changed what it really was. A prison. Armed men stood outside every door. Cameras watched every hallway. Locked gates surrounded the property. Victor Callahan treated her politely, but that somehow made everything worse. He never shouted, never threatened her openly. Instead, he acted like she already belonged there, like she was some missing piece he had finally found, that terrified her more than violence ever could. Every morning, Victor sent breakfast to her room. Every afternoon, he sent dresses, books, jewelry, and expensive gifts she never touched. Every night, he tried to convince her that Grayson would never come. But Eleanor never believed him, because even before the marriage became real, she knew one thing about Grayson Moretti. He never walked away from people he loved. Still, fear followed her everywhere, especially at night, because the longer she stayed trapped inside the estate, the harder it became to hold on to hope. Some nights, she stood near the bedroom window, staring at the gates and wondering if Grayson was still searching. Other nights, she wondered if he was already dead. Victor noticed her getting weaker. That was why he finally told her the truth. One evening, he entered her room carrying an old photograph. He placed it carefully on the table in front of her. Eleanor stared down at it. Her mother stood beside Victor in the picture. Both of them looked younger. Happier. Victor looked at her quietly. Your mother was supposed to stay with me. Eleanor looked away immediately, because she did not care. Nothing he said could change what he had done. Victor sat down across from her. She left because of your father, he continued. Then she spent years hiding from me. Eleanor's chest tightened, because for the first time, she realized something terrible. Victor did not think he kidnapped her. He thought he was taking back something that belonged to him. That made him even more dangerous. Back in New York, Grayson finally discovered there was another problem. Someone inside his crew had been leaking information again. 2 supply trucks disappeared before reaching Chicago. A safe house outside Cleveland got raided hours after his men arrived, and one of his captains ended up dead inside a motel room. The message was obvious. Victor Callahan knew they were coming. Grayson started trusting fewer people. He cut his own crew into smaller groups. Nobody knew the full rescue plan except Dominic and Bennett. The paranoia made everything worse, because when betrayal already existed inside your family, it became impossible to know who was still loyal. 3 nights before the attack, Grayson sat alone inside his office looking through old photographs of Eleanor. One showed her standing near the ocean months before the wedding. Another showed her laughing beside her younger cousins. And one showed her in the church only minutes before they got married. She looked nervous in the picture, but she also looked at him like she believed he might protect her. That was the memory Grayson could not stop thinking about, because if he failed now, she would lose that faith forever. Dominic found him sitting there just before midnight. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Dominic finally asked the question he had been avoiding. What happens if we cannot get her out? Grayson looked up slowly. We will. Dominic hesitated. And if she does not survive? The room became silent, because Grayson had thought about that too. Every hour, every day, every time he closed his eyes. But he refused to say it out loud, because speaking that fear made it real. She survives, Grayson said quietly. Or none of us do. That answer stayed with Dominic long after he left the room. By the end of the week, the rescue plan was ready. 4 teams, 3 entrances, 1 goal. Reach Eleanor before Victor moved her again. Rain covered Chicago the night they arrived. The estate looked even larger in person. Tall iron gates surrounded the property. Security lights covered the walls. Armed guards stood outside the front entrance. For several seconds, Grayson sat inside the SUV staring at the mansion, because somewhere inside that house, Eleanor was waiting, maybe scared, maybe hurt, maybe already losing hope. That thought made something cold move through him. He checked the gun beneath his jacket. Then he looked at Bennett. Neither man needed to speak. The war had already started. The first explosion hit the back gate at exactly midnight. The sound shook the entire property. Alarms exploded across the estate. Guards rushed outside. Then Grayson's men moved. Bullets shattered windows. Smoke filled the front lawn. Several guards dropped before they even understood what was happening. The estate exploded into chaos. Inside the house, Eleanor woke to shouting and gunfire. For 1 second, she thought she was dreaming. Then another explosion shook the walls. She ran toward the bedroom window. Outside, black SUVs covered the driveway. Men moved through the property with guns. The front doors burst open downstairs. And somehow, even through the smoke, the rain, and the chaos, Eleanor knew exactly who had come for her. Grayson. She did not know how. She just knew. Victor stormed into her room, seconds later. His face looked colder than ever. It is him, he said quietly. Eleanor stared at him. Victor almost smiled. He really did start a war for you. Gunfire echoed through the hallway outside. Victor grabbed her arm. We are leaving. Eleanor pulled away from him immediately. No. Victor's face darkened. You do not understand what he is. For the first time since he took her, Eleanor looked at him without fear. No, she said quietly. You do not. Downstairs, Grayson moved through the mansion like a man with nothing left to lose. Smoke filled the hallways. Broken glass covered the floor. Bodies lay near the staircase. He barely noticed any of it, because he only cared about one thing, finding Eleanor. He reached the second floor, just as one of Victor's men stepped out a side room. Grayson shot him immediately. Then he heard her voice. Somewhere down the hallway. He ran toward it without thinking. Victor's guards tried to stop him. None of them survived long enough. At the end of the hallway, Grayson finally saw her. Eleanor stood near the bedroom doorway, with Victor beside her. For 1 second, the entire world disappeared, because after weeks of fear, anger, and violence, she was finally there, alive. Grayson looked at her. Eleanor looked back at him. Neither of them moved, because after everything they survived, they both realized the same thing. They never stopped belonging to each other. Then Victor lifted his gun, and Eleanor screamed Grayson's name. She survived kidnappers, betrayal, and violence, but the hardest part was learning the truth about the man she loved. The gunshot came a second after Eleanor screamed. Victor Callahan fired first. Grayson pulled Eleanor down just as the bullet tore through the wall behind them. The hallway exploded into chaos again. Smoke filled the air. Men shouted downstairs. Victor disappeared behind 2 guards while Grayson dragged Eleanor into the nearest room. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. They just looked at each other, because after everything that happened, after weeks apart, they were finally standing in the same room again, alive. Eleanor threw her arms around him without thinking. Grayson held her so tightly it almost hurt. For one brief second, the war outside stopped mattering. Nothing existed except the fact that they found each other again. Then another explosion shook the mansion. Reality came back immediately. Grayson grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the hallway. Dominic and Bennett were already moving through the second floor with armed men behind them. Victor's guards were falling back toward the lower level. They were trying to escape. Grayson knew he had to finish this. But before he could move farther, Eleanor grabbed his arm. "There's something you need to know," she said quickly. Grayson looked at her. Her face looked pale. Terrified, not because of Victor, because of something else. "We do not have time," Grayson said. "You need to hear this." Something in her voice made him stop, because Eleanor almost never sounded afraid like that. She pulled a folded file from beneath her coat. Victor had shown it to her only hours earlier. At first, she thought it was another lie, another attempt to manipulate her. But then she saw the names, the dates, the signatures, and suddenly, nothing looked the same anymore. Grayson took the papers from her. His expression changed almost immediately because he recognized the documents. Old Moretti shipping records, private ledgers, transfer orders, and near the bottom of one page, there was a signature he knew too well, his own. For a second, he stopped breathing. The world around him felt farther away because the dates on the papers matched the same week Eleanor's mother died. Grayson looked back at her slowly. "No." Eleanor stared at him. "You knew about this?" He looked down at the papers again. His hands tightened around them. 20 years earlier, Eleanor's mother died in what everyone believed was a car accident outside Philadelphia. The case stayed unsolved. People whispered for years that it was connected to the war between the Hayes family and Victor Callahan. But nobody ever proved anything. Now Eleanor finally understood why. Because it had not been an accident. The records in her hand showed that the Moretti family arranged a hit. Victor had not killed her mother. The Morettis did. And Grayson's signature appeared on one of the transportation orders connected to men who carried it out. For several seconds, neither of them moved. The hallway around them disappeared. The gunfire, the smoke, the shouting, none of it mattered anymore. Because one terrible truth changed everything. Grayson was connected to the worst thing that ever happened to her family. "You knew," Eleanor whispered. Grayson looked at her. "No." But even he could hear how weak that answer sounded, because the signature was real. His signature. Eleanor stepped back slowly. "You were part of it." Grayson shook his head immediately. "I did not know what it was." Her eyes filled with tears. "How could you not know?" Grayson looked back down at the papers, because deep down he already understood the truth. Years ago, when he was younger, his father made him sign documents all the time. Shipping records, property transfers, business agreements. He never questioned them. He never looked closely. He trusted his father. And now he realized that trust destroyed someone innocent. Eleanor's chest tightened so hard she could barely breathe, because for weeks she survived by believing one thing: that Grayson was different from the men around him, different from the families, different from the violence. Now she was not sure anymore. The hardest part was not the anger. It was a heartbreak, because she still loved him. Even standing there with proof in her hands, she still loved him, and that made everything worse. Grayson stepped toward her. "I swear to you I never knew." Eleanor looked at him through tears. "But you still signed it." Those words hit him harder than anything else, because she was right. Maybe he did not know exactly what he was helping his father do, but he still helped. He still obeyed. He still spent years protecting a family built on blood and secrets. And Eleanor's mother paid the price. The room went silent between them. For the first time since they met, neither of them knew what to say. Dominic appeared near the doorway. "We have to go," he said quickly. Victor's men were retreating. The house was filling with smoke. Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. But Eleanor barely heard any of it, because her entire world had just broken apart. Grayson reached for her hand. She pulled away. That hurt him more than the bullet wound spreading across his shoulder, because for the first time, she looked at him the way she looked at him before they ever got married. like she did not know who he was. They escaped the estate minutes later. Victor disappeared during the chaos. Several of his men died. Others ran. By sunrise, the Chicago mansion was burning. News stations called it a private security disaster. Police blamed rival criminal groups. Nobody outside their world knew the truth. Back in New York, Grayson brought Eleanor to one of the safest apartments overlooking the city. Doctors treated the cut on her arm. Dominic placed extra guards outside every entrance. But none of it mattered, because even inside the apartment, they felt farther apart than ever. For 2 days, Eleanor barely spoke to him. She stayed inside the guest room near the back of the apartment. She avoided looking at him, avoided hearing his voice, because every time she saw him, she remembered her mother, the funeral, the unanswered questions, the years she spent wishing she had one more memory of her. And now she knew the truth. Amority took that away from her. One night, Grayson found her standing alone on the balcony. Rain covered the city below. Eleanor looked smaller somehow, tired, broken. Grayson stopped beside her carefully. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then he finally looked at her. "I would change if I could." Eleanor kept staring at the city. "You cannot." "I know." She looked down at her hands. "For my entire life, I hated Victor because I thought he destroyed my family." Grayson said nothing. "Now I find out your family did too." The pain in her voice made him close his eyes briefly, because there was no defense against something like that. No excuse. No explanation good enough. "I never want to become my father," he said quietly. Eleanor finally looked at him. "But you did." Those words stayed between them. Heavy, painful, because deep down, Grayson feared she was right. He spent his entire life trying to be different, trying to protect people, trying to stop violence. And somehow, he still became part of the same cycle, the same blood, the same destruction. Over the next week, the distance between them only became worse. Grayson threw himself into work. He hunted the last of Victor's men. He searched for Salvatore. He cut ties with the businesses connected to his father. But none of it fixed what happened. None of it brought Eleanor back to him, because emotionally, she was already gone. One afternoon, Eleanor quietly packed a suitcase. She did it slowly, carefully, like she was trying not to make noise. The apartment looked empty around her. She folded her clothes, packed her mother's photograph, packed a wedding ring she never wore again, and for a few seconds, she just stood there staring at the room, because despite everything, leaving still hurt. She loved him. That was the problem. It would have been easier if she hated him. Grayson found her near the front door. For 1 second, neither of them moved. He looked at the suitcase, then back at her. "You are leaving?" Eleanor looked down. "I have to." Grayson stared at her, because he knew this moment was coming. He just hoped he was wrong. "I can fix this," he said quietly. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "No, you cannot." The room became silent, because deep down, both of them knew love was not always enough. Sometimes people hurt each other too badly. Sometimes the truth destroyed things that could never be repaired. Grayson stepped closer. For 1 second, it looked like he might reach for her, but he stopped himself, because he knew he did not deserve to ask her to stay. Eleanor looked at him one last time. Then she walked away. Grayson stood alone in the apartment long after the door closed behind her. For the first time in years, he felt completely powerless, because no enemy ever hurt him the way Eleanor just did. 3 days later, Eleanor checked into a small hotel outside Boston under a fake name. She spent most of her time alone, thinking, trying to understand what her life had become. One morning, she woke up feeling sick. At first, she blamed the stress, the lack of sleep, the constant travel. But when it happened again the next day, something inside her shifted, a quiet fear, a terrible possibility. Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat alone in the bathroom staring down at the small test in her shaking hands. Then she looked at the result, and suddenly she realized she was hiding a secret of her own. She thought losing Grayson was the end of her story, but it was only the beginning. For 2 weeks, Eleanor stayed hidden inside the small hotel outside Boston. She barely left the room. The television stayed off. The curtain stayed closed. Most days, she sat near the window, staring out at the gray streets below, while trying to understand how everything in her life changed so quickly. She touched her stomach more than once without realizing it, because every hour, the truth felt more real. She was carrying Grayson's child. That should have made her happy. Instead, it terrified her, because she did not know what kind of future waited for them anymore. She did not know if Grayson was still searching for her. And even worse, she did not know if she wanted him to. Back in New York, Grayson looked worse every day. He barely slept. He barely ate. Most of the Moretti empire sat in pieces around him. Several businesses were gone. The alliance with the Hayes family was destroyed. Victor Callahan disappeared after Chicago. Salvatore Moretti was still missing. And Eleanor was gone. For the first time in his life, Grayson no longer looked like a man in control. He looked like a man carrying too much grief. Dominic found him one night, sitting alone inside the office at the Moretti estate. Files covered the desk. Photographs, old ledgers, phone records, maps. Grayson had spent every waking hour searching for Salvatore, because deep down he knew his uncle was still the center of everything. Salvatore wanted the war. He wanted the marriage to fail. And somehow, Grayson knew there was still more he did not understand. Dominic placed another file on the desk. "We found him," he said quietly. Grayson looked up immediately. Salvatore had been hiding inside a private house near the Canadian border. 3 armed guards protected the property. Several fake passports were found inside. And hidden in the basement, investigators discovered something far worse. Boxes of old files, photographs, letters, evidence, years of it. Grayson stared at the pages for nearly an hour, because finally all the missing pieces started fitting together. Salvatore did not only help Eleanor disappear. He did not only work with Luca. He had secretly been working with Victor Callahan for years. The 2 men built the war together. Every shooting, every burned business, every dead family member, most of it traced back to them, because fear made money, violence created loyalty, and peace would have destroyed the power both men spent years building. But there was one final secret hidden inside the files, one secret worse than everything else. Eleanor's mother had not been killed because of Victor. She had been killed because she found proof that Salvatore was stealing money from both families and selling information to their enemies. She planned to expose him. So Salvatore arranged the hit. Then he blamed Victor. Then he blamed the war. And everyone believed him. Grayson stared at the evidence with shaking hands. Because for years, he hated himself for something he never fully understood. Now he realized the truth. His signature had been forged. The transportation order connected to Eleanor's mother had been changed after he signed it. Salvatore used Grayson's name to protect himself. For 1 second, Grayson could not breathe, because suddenly he understood 2 terrible things. He was innocent, and Eleanor had left before learning the truth. That same night, Grayson drove to Boston alone. No guards, no drivers, no security. Just him. Because this was not business anymore. This was the last chance he had. When he finally reached the hotel, rain covered the streets outside. He stood in front of Eleanor's door for several seconds before knocking. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door slowly opened. Eleanor stood there wearing a gray sweater and jeans. She looked surprised, tired, more beautiful than he remembered. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke, because after everything, they did not know where to begin. Then Eleanor noticed the look on his face. And suddenly, she knew something had changed. Grayson held the file out toward her. "You need to read this." An hour later, they sat across from each other inside the hotel room, while Eleanor turned the pages with shaking hands. Photographs, bank transfers, letters, old recordings. Everything pointed to Salvatore. Not Grayson, not Victor. Salvatore Moretti destroyed her family. When Eleanor reached the forged transportation order, tears filled her eyes immediately because Grayson's signature was there. But so was the proof that it had been altered afterward. She looked up at him slowly. "You did not know?" Grayson shook his head. "No." For a second, neither of them moved. because the anger she carried for weeks suddenly had nowhere to go. It did not erase what happened. It did not erase the lies or the pain, but it changed everything. Eleanor looked down at the papers again, then back at him. You came all the way here for this? Grayson looked at her quietly. I came because losing you is the only thing that ever made me understand what really matters. The room became silent, because for the first time in weeks, Eleanor looked at him and did not see the man who destroyed her family. She saw the man who crossed cities to protect her, the man who started a war to bring her home, the man who still looked broken without her. Then Eleanor looked down at her hands, because she was carrying another truth now too, a truth she had not told anyone, not even herself out loud. She slowly placed one hand against her stomach. Grayson noticed immediately. His expression changed. For a second, he looked confused. Then he understood. Eleanor looked at him through tears. I found out after I left. Grayson stared at her. The room became completely silent, because suddenly, after all the violence and heartbreak, there was something else between them, something fragile, something new, a future. For the first time in years, Grayson looked afraid, not of enemies, not of war, of losing this. Slowly, he moved closer. You do not have to forgive me, he said quietly, but I want to spend the rest of my life trying to deserve both of you. Those words broke something inside Eleanor, because despite everything, despite the pain and the lies and the distance, she still loved him, and maybe she always would. A week later, both families gathered at the old Moretti estate for the final confrontation. Salvatore had been captured. Victor Callahan had disappeared again. The remaining members of both families wanted answers. The meeting took place inside the same room where Grayson and Eleanor signed the marriage agreement months earlier. But now everything felt different, because nobody came for peace. They came for the truth. Salvatore sat at the far end of the room in handcuffs. He looked older, smaller, but his eyes still looked cruel. For years, he had behind the war, behind the family name, behind fear. Now everyone finally saw him for what he really was, a man who destroyed lives because he wanted power. Eleanor stood beside Grayson while the evidence was spread across the table. The room stayed silent as the truth came out. Salvatore stole money from both families. He sold information. He arranged murders. He started wars. He killed Eleanor's mother. He framed Victor. He framed Grayson. And he nearly destroyed everything. Some members of the Hayes family wanted Salvatore dead immediately. Some of the Morettis wanted to protect him because he was still blood. But Grayson looked at them with complete disgust. No more lies, he said quietly. For the first time in years, the room listened, because Grayson no longer sounded like the heir to a criminal family. He sounded like someone ready to end it. Salvatore looked at him with hatred. You think turning against your own blood makes you better than me? Grayson stared at him. No, he said quietly. I think it is the first good thing I have ever done. By the end of the night, the evidence against Salvatore reached federal agents, reporters, and prosecutors. The remaining Moretti businesses connected to violence were shut down. Several corrupt judges and officers disappeared from power. The war finally ended, not with bullets, with truth. Months later, Grayson sold most of what remained of the Moretti empire, the clubs, the warehouses, the private compounds, the businesses connected to his father. He kept only enough to protect Eleanor and the baby. Nothing more. He spent the rest giving money to families hurt by the war, families his name helped destroy. Eleanor watched all of it carefully, because for the first time, she saw Grayson become the man he always wanted to be. Not perfect, not innocent, but better. And sometimes better was enough. By spring, they moved into a quiet house near the water outside Boston. No guards near every door. No guns hidden in drawers. No family meetings filled with threats. Just peace, the kind they spent their whole lives searching for. One afternoon, Eleanor stood near the nursery window while Grayson painted one of the walls pale blue. For a moment, everything felt normal, safe, like maybe they survived enough to deserve happiness. Grayson walked toward her slowly and placed one hand over hers. Then he kissed the side of her head gently. Eleanor looked up at him. For the first time in a long time, neither of them looked afraid. But later that night, after Eleanor fell asleep, Grayson found a small package sitting outside the front door. No return address. No name. Inside was a photograph. Victor Callahan standing beside Salvatore Moretti, both of them smiling. On the back of the picture, one sentence was written in black ink. You still do not know who betrayed you first.